They called me a gold digger, an opportunist, a nobody. His mother literally slammed the door in my face. But 5 years later, I'm the one he chose, against his family's wishes, against their threats to disown him. This is how our forbidden love conquered everything. Hi, I'm Zara, 28, marketing executive at a mid-sized firm, and completely ordinary, or at least that's what I thought. I grew up in Oakland with my mom, who worked 2 jobs to put me through college. I was the first in my family to graduate, and I promised myself I'd build a life that would make her sacrifices worth it. By the time I turned 27, I had my own apartment, a career I was proud of, and a small circle of friends who felt like family. Dating wasn't even on my priority list. That all changed on a rainy Tuesday in October. My flight from Chicago had been delayed, and I was rushing through the airport, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, trying to call an Uber. That's when I literally crashed into him, spilling my coffee all over his obviously expensive coat. I was mortified. I kept apologizing, dabbing at his coat with the tiny napkin I had, making everything worse. And then he laughed. Not an annoyed laugh, but this genuine, warm sound that made me look up at his face for the first time. I should be the one apologizing, he said, taking the napkin from my hand. I wasn't looking where I was going. His name was Elijah Montgomery. He offered to buy me another coffee while his driver came around. One coffee turned into dinner that night, which turned into breakfast the next morning. We talked for hours about everything. Our childhoods, our dreams, books we loved. Not once did he mention his family's company or their fortune. I honestly thought he was just a successful businessman, maybe a vice president or something. There was this moment right before we said goodbye, when he touched my hand across the table. The way he looked at me, like he could see parts of me that I'd kept hidden from everyone else. I felt myself falling, even though every practical bone in my body was screaming that this was just a chance encounter, nothing more. But 3 text messages and 5 hours later, he was asking when he could see me again. I didn't know then that his family was worth billions. I didn't know that our coffee spill would lead to the most challenging and beautiful journey of my life. I didn't know that loving him would mean facing a world that would try everything to convince me I didn't belong there. So if you've ever wondered what it's like when 2 worlds collide, when love finds you in the most unexpected places and then asks you to fight for it, stay with me. I'm going to tell you exactly how this black woman from Oakland navigated a world that wasn't designed for people like me, and how our love overcame the deepest prejudices. Because sometimes, the greatest love stories aren't about finding someone perfect. They're about finding someone who sees your worth when everyone else is blind to it. For the next few weeks, Elijah and I lived in our own little bubble. He'd fly into Oakland on Friday evenings, and we'd spend the weekend exploring my favorite spots. The tiny Ethiopian restaurant where the owner knew my name. The bookstore, with the perfect reading nook. The hiking trail with the view of the bay that made you feel like you owned the world. In those early days, he was just Elijah, thoughtful, curious, and surprisingly down to earth. I'd worked hard for everything I had. After college, I started at the bottom of my company, staying late every night, taking on projects nobody wanted, slowly earning respect and promotions. My apartment wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every artwork on the wall represented a small victory. When Elijah first came over, I was nervous. Would he judge my IKEA bookshelves, or the way my kitchen barely fit 2 people? Instead, he looked around with genuine interest, picking up the small wooden elephant my mom had brought back from her one and only international trip, asking me about the story behind each photo on my wall. "I love that you've built this," he said that night, as we sat on my small balcony, drinking wine from mismatched glasses. "It feels like you." I didn't understand the weight behind those words until much later. The first hint that Elijah wasn't just a successful businessman came when he invited me to dinner at a restaurant where the menu had no prices. I wore my one designer dress, a splurge from a sample sale last year, and still felt underdressed. The waiter recognized him, calling him Mr. Montgomery, with a deference that made me sit up straighter. On the way home, I finally asked, "So, exactly what do you do?" The question seemed to amuse him. "My family has a company," he said simply. "I run the West Coast operations." That was an understatement I'd later laugh about. The Montgomerys didn't just have a company, they had an empire that spanned technology, real estate and energy. Elijah was being groomed to take over as CEO when his father retired. The truth came out fully when a friend texted me a gossip site link with photos of us leaving that restaurant. "OMG, is this you with Elijah Montgomery?" The article called him the heir to the Montgomery fortune and speculated about who I was. I sat on my bed, phone in hand, Googling his name. Hundreds of results populated my screen. Charity galas, business profiles, society pages. I felt like I'd been dating someone under an alias. When I confronted him, there was real fear in his eyes. "I wanted you to know me," he said quietly. "Just me, not my family name or bank account." And despite my shock, I understood. How many people in his life wanted something from him? How many relationships had been tainted by the glow of wealth? Our fifth date, he took me sailing on the bay, just the two of us, no crew, no pretense. As the sun set over the water, he told me about growing up with the crushing weight of expectations, about board meetings he'd been sitting in since he was 16, about the loneliness of never knowing if people liked you for yourself. I told him about my mom working night shifts, about the scholarship that changed my life, about my dreams of starting a foundation for girls from neighborhoods like mine. That night, under a canopy of stars, we shared our first real kiss, not the polite goodnight kisses we'd exchanged before, but something that felt like jumping off a cliff together, trusting we'd catch each other. I knew I was falling in love with him. Not Elijah Montgomery, the billionaire, but Elijah who laughed too loud at bad jokes and who could talk for hours about obscure history and who looked at me like I was the extraordinary one. "I think I'm falling for you," he whispered against my hair. "And it terrifies me." "Why?" I asked, heart pounding so hard I was sure he could feel it. "Because for the first time in my life, I've found something I'm not willing to lose, no matter what anyone else thinks." I didn't understand what he meant by anyone else then. I was about to find out that in Elijah's world, love wasn't just between two people. It was a public affair, subject to approval, scrutiny, and, as I would soon learn, fierce opposition. 3 months into our relationship, Elijah asked me to meet his family. "It's just dinner," he said, but his tense shoulders told a different story. We were in my apartment, making breakfast on a lazy Sunday. He'd been unusually quiet, checking his phone more than usual. "My mother's birthday is next weekend. The whole family will be there." I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. I spent hours choosing my outfit, a classic black dress that I hoped struck the right balance between elegant and understated. Elijah picked me up in a car that probably cost more than my annual salary, looking handsome but tense in a tailored suit. On the drive to his family's estate in Atherton, he kept reaching for my hand, squeezing it like he was trying to transfer strength between us. "They can be intense," he warned, "especially my mother. Just be yourself. That's who I—" He stopped, then finished softly. "That's who I'm falling in love with." The estate was like something from a movie. Sprawling gardens, a circular driveway with a fountain, uniformed staff opening doors. I took a deep breath and stepped into a world I'd only seen in magazines. I'll never forget the silence that fell over the room when we walked in. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Eyes moved from Elijah to me, then back to Elijah, with questions no one was asking aloud. His mother, Caroline Montgomery, a slim woman with silver blonde hair and perfect posture, recovered first. Her smile never reached her eyes as she approached us. "Elijah, darling," she said, kissing his cheek before turning to me. "And you must be Zara, is it?" How lovely to meet you. The way she said my name made it sound foreign, like she was tasting something unfamiliar and not entirely pleasant. Dinner was an exercise in subtle warfare, questions that seemed innocent but carried weight. And where exactly did you grow up? What does your father do? Where did you summer as a child? I answered honestly, watching their expressions shift between surprise and something darker. Elijah's father barely acknowledged me, directing all his questions to his son about business matters I wasn't expected to understand. It was Elijah's sister, Rebecca, who delivered the first direct blow. So, Zara, she said, swirling her wine, how exactly did you and my brother meet? It seems so unexpected. The emphasis on that last word hung in the air. Before I could answer, Elijah's mother chimed in. What Rebecca means is that Elijah usually meets girls through family connections. The Preston's daughter has been asking about you, by the way, she added, turning to Elijah. She's just finished her MBA at Wharton. I felt Elijah tense beside me. Zara and I met at the airport, actually. I spilled coffee all over her, and she still agreed to have dinner with me. He reached for my hand under the table. Sometimes the best things happen by accident. How charming, his mother replied, her tone suggesting it was anything but. Though I've always believed that the most successful relationships have compatible backgrounds. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of pointed remarks, disguised as polite conversation. As we were leaving, Elijah's father pulled him aside for a quick word that lasted 20 minutes. I waited in the foyer, feeling the weight of Caroline Montgomery's gaze as she pretended to adjust a flower arrangement. You seem like a nice enough girl, she said suddenly, her voice low. But surely you understand that Elijah has responsibilities, expectations. The Montgomery name carries weight. She stepped closer, her perfume expensive and suffocating. Young men often go through phases of rebellion, dating someone different. It rarely lasts. Before I could respond, Elijah returned, his jaw tight with anger. He said nothing until we were in the car, driving away from the estate. I'm sorry, he finally said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I should have prepared you better. Your mother made it pretty clear what she thinks of me, I said quietly. Elijah pulled the car over suddenly, turning to face me. Listen to me. What my family thinks. It doesn't matter. They don't know you. They don't see what I see. He took my face in his hands. I love you, Zara. I think I've loved you since you tried to clean my coat with that tiny napkin. It was the first time he'd said those words. Despite the disastrous dinner, despite the knot of anxiety in my stomach, I felt a surge of courage. I love you too, I whispered back. That night should have been a warning of what was to come. Instead, it became our declaration of war, us against a world that didn't want us together. We didn't know then how dirty that war would get, or how much it would cost us both. But in that moment, love felt like enough. It felt like everything. The following week, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Caroline Montgomery's personal assistant inviting me to lunch. Mrs. Montgomery would like to get to know you better, the assistant explained. Elijah was out of town on business, and against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. The restaurant was exclusive, the kind of place where people pay to be seen and not heard. Caroline was already seated when I arrived, impeccable in cream-colored cashmere. She wasted no time on pleasantries. I'll be direct, she said, not even glancing at the menu. You seem intelligent enough to understand the situation. My son is set to inherit one of the largest private fortunes in this country. He needs a partner who understands his world, who can stand beside him at board meetings and charity galas, who knows the right people. She finally looked at me, her gaze clinical. That isn't you. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept my voice steady. With all due respect, Mrs. Montgomery, that's for Elijah to decide. Her laugh was soft and cutting. My dear, men like my son often think with their hearts, or other organs, rather than their heads. It's charming, really, but eventually, reality sets in. She reached into her purse and slid an envelope across the table. I'm prepared to offer you a generous arrangement, enough to start that little foundation you told Elijah about. All I ask is that you end things with him. Cleanly, kindly. I stared at the envelope, feeling sick. You're trying to buy me off? I'm offering you an opportunity, she corrected. This relationship has no future. You must know that. I'm simply suggesting we avoid the inevitable pain and scandal. I stood up, leaving the envelope untouched. I love your son, Mrs. Montgomery. Not his money, not his name. Him. And I'm sorry you can't see that. As I walked out, she called after me. Love doesn't survive this kind of difference, Zara. It never does. That night, I told Elijah everything. I expected anger, but instead saw a resigned sadness in his eyes. She's done this before, he admitted, though never quite so boldly. He pulled me close. I'm sorry, but I'm not surprised. This is just the beginning of what they'll try. He was right. Within weeks, I noticed cars following me to work. My social media accounts were suddenly flooded with connection requests from strangers. A college acquaintance called to tell me a private investigator had contacted her, asking questions about my past. My boss mentioned casually that a potential client had asked about me, with a particular interest in my personal life. They were watching us, gathering ammunition. And I realized with growing dread that the Montgomerys wouldn't just disapprove of our relationship, they would try to destroy it. The Montgomerys escalated from surveillance to sabotage with frightening efficiency. My promotion at work mysteriously vanished, the position eliminated due to budget concerns just days after I'd been told it was mine. Then my landlord suddenly needed to renovate my apartment building, giving me 30 days to find a new place in a market where rents had skyrocketed. When I confided in my best friend Maya about a job interview, I arrived to find the position had been filled that morning. The message was clear. They could touch every part of my life. The strain began showing in quiet ways. Elijah and I started fighting, not about his family directly, but about everything else. Small irritations magnified by the constant pressure. He suggested I move in with him, but I refused. I needed something that was still mine, untouched by Montgomery money. My pride was the only thing they couldn't take from me, but it was also building walls between us. My lowest moment came after a particularly vicious article appeared online, suggesting I had a criminal past and questioning my suspicious rise at my company. My mother called in tears after neighbors showed it to her. That night, alone in my new, smaller apartment, I broke down completely. Maybe they were right. Maybe love wasn't enough to bridge worlds this different. Maybe I was just hurting everyone I cared about by holding on. But then Maya showed up at my door with wine and determination. They win if you give up, she said simply. My mother called next, her voice steady. You've never walked away from a fight that mattered, baby. Don't start now. And Elijah, who appeared at midnight with red-rimmed eyes, holding me as if I might disappear. We choose each other, every day. That's what they'll never understand. Sometimes your strength comes from the voices that believe in you when you've stopped believing in yourself. With them behind me, I found my resolve again. The Montgomerys had money and power, but they'd never face someone with nothing left to lose. After 6 months of psychological warfare, Elijah's father made a tactical error. He called a family meeting and insisted Elijah attend, alone. What he didn't know was that Elijah had started recording these meetings. After the third time, his words were twisted and used against me. That night, Elijah sat silently as his father, mother, and 2 board members laid out their ultimatum: end things with me or lose his position in the company. It's not personal, his father said coldly. It's business. The board has concerns about your judgment, your distraction. Your mother and I have overlooked your rebellious phases before, he continued. The charity work in developing countries, the environmental initiatives that cost us millions. But this relationship is different. It's visible. It's a statement. And it's not one the Montgomery name can be associated with. When Caroline added, "We've prepared a press release announcing your engagement to Catherine Preston," something in Elijah snapped. He played me the recording that night, his hands shaking with a rage I'd never seen in him before. "They want a war," he said. "They've got one." The next morning, we walked into the Montgomery Industries headquarters together, hand in hand. Elijah had called an emergency board meeting. I sat quietly at his side as he addressed the room of stunned executives and family members. "For months, my family has conducted a systematic campaign of harassment against the woman I love," he began, his voice steady. "They've interfered with her employment, her housing, her reputation. They've followed her, investigated her, and attempted to buy her off." He looked directly at his father. "They've threatened my position in this company as a means of controlling my personal life." He played selected portions of the recording. The room fell deadly silent. "This stops today," Elijah continued. "As of this moment, I'm exercising my voting rights as a major shareholder. I move to establish an independent ethics committee to oversee all corporate governance, including family involvement in management decisions." His father stood up, face red with fury. "You would choose this girl over your family, over your birthright?" Elijah's response was quiet but firm. "I'm choosing integrity. I'm choosing to be someone worthy of her love." What followed was corporate chaos, board members taking sides, lawyers being called, threats and counter-threats flying. Through it all, I sat still, watching years of unchecked power finally face a challenge. When Caroline tried to approach me, I simply held up my hand. "Not today," I said, surprising myself with my calm. "I'm not the one you need to fix things with." As we left the building, Elijah's younger sister Olivia, who had remained silent throughout the meeting, followed us to the elevator. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I think you're the best thing that ever happened to him." She handed Elijah a flash drive. "Dad's been moving money from your trust into offshore accounts. Thought you might need this." It was the first crack in the family's united front, and it wouldn't be the last. That night, as we sat on the balcony of Elijah's apartment, the weight of the day finally hit us both. "Are you sure?" I asked him. "They're your family." He took my hands in his. "Family is supposed to want your happiness. They're just shareholders who happen to share my DNA." He brushed a tear from my cheek. "You're my family now, Zara. If you'll still have me after all this." In answer, I reached into my purse and pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple silver watch I'd saved for months to buy. "In my family," I said, "we don't have heirlooms or trust funds to give. But when we find someone we want to build a life with, we give them something that symbolizes our time together." I fastened it around his wrist. "All I can promise is that every second will be real. Every second will be ours." He held me then, both of us crying and laughing at the same time, standing on the precipice of a future neither of us could fully see, but one we would shape together. The war wasn't over, but that day, the balance of power shifted. For the first time, the Montgomerys realized they might not win. The months following the boardroom showdown transformed us both. Elijah fought a legal battle for control of his shares, while launching a separate foundation focused on educational equity. I found a position with a smaller marketing firm that valued my skills over my connections. Together, we created a life that belonged to us, not to the Montgomery legacy or anyone's expectations. Our wedding took place on a beach at sunset, far from the society pages and gilded ballrooms of Elijah's past. My mother walked me down the aisle, wearing a dress that made her look like royalty. Maya stood beside me as my maid of honor, whispering, "You showed them all," as she adjusted my veil. We wrote our own vows, promising not just love and fidelity, but courage and honesty. Promises forged in the fire we'd already walked through together. Among the small crowd of guests sat Olivia and, surprisingly, Elijah's grandfather Harrison. the original architect of the Montgomery fortune. At 92, he had travelled against doctors' orders to be there. "My grandson found something I never did," he told me at the reception, his voice raspy with age. "A love worth more than money. Don't waste it." Caroline and Elijah's father did not attend. Their absence was like a shadow that couldn't quite reach us in the golden light of that day. 2 years later, when our daughter Amara was born, something shifted again. Harrison visited the hospital, bringing a handcrafted wooden cradle that had held 3 generations of Montgomerys. A week later, a bouquet arrived from Caroline. No note, just flowers. It wasn't forgiveness or acceptance exactly, but it was acknowledgement. A tiny bridge across a still vast divide. Elijah's father remained distant until his heart attack last year. In the hospital, seeing his own mortality in the sterile white room, something broke open in him. "I was wrong," he said simply, looking from Elijah to me to Amara, who sat on my lap drawing pictures for her Grandpa Jim. Not, "I'm sorry." The Montgomery pride wouldn't bend that far, but it was enough to begin healing. Today, our family exists in a delicate balance. Sunday dinners at Caroline's house are still sometimes tense, conversations carefully navigating around certain topics. But watching Amara climb onto her grandmother's lap, seeing the woman soften in spite of herself, it feels like a victory neither side expected. The world we've built isn't perfect. Elijah still carries wounds from choosing me over his family's approval. I still sometimes feel the sting when certain doors remain closed to me in their world. But we've learned that love isn't about finding perfection. It's about choosing each other through the imperfect, complicated reality of life. Last month, at a charity gala benefiting the foundation we started together, Caroline approached me at the bar. We stood in awkward silence before she finally spoke. "You've been good for him," she said, watching Elijah across the room. "Better than I expected." From her, it was practically a sonnet. "He's been good for me too," I replied. She nodded, then added quietly, "Amara has his eyes, but she has your spirit." She touched my arm briefly before walking away. In that small gesture was everything we'd fought for. Recognition that our love had created something beautiful, something that even she could no longer deny. The Montgomery name still opens doors, but it's what Elijah and I built together that gives our life meaning. His family may never fully embrace me, but they've learned to respect us. And somewhere along this journey, I stopped needing their approval. The love we fought for has proven stronger than prejudice, stronger than family expectations, stronger than the divide between our worlds. So if you're standing where I once stood, loving someone across boundaries others think you shouldn't cross, know this: it won't be easy. There will be days when you question everything, but if what you feel is real, if you're willing to fight not just against others but sometimes against your own doubts, it can be worth it. Love doesn't conquer all, but it gives you the strength to conquer what matters. Our story isn't a fairy tale. It's messy and ongoing and real, but it's ours, and I wouldn't trade it for all the easy paths in the world. Looking back on our journey, I barely recognize the woman I was when I spilled that coffee 5 years ago. She was strong in her own way, but still defining her worth through other people's expectations. The woman I am now knows that worth isn't something others bestow upon you. It's something you claim for yourself, every day, through every challenge. Loving Elijah taught me that real love isn't about fitting perfectly into someone's world. It's about creating a new world together, one that honors both of your truths. We had to fight for our love in ways most couples never imagine, and that fight transformed us both. Elijah found the courage to define himself beyond his family name. I found the strength to stand in rooms designed to make me feel small, and instead make those rooms expand to include me. Today, our relationship with the Montgomery family exists in shades of gray. Some Sunday dinners still feel like navigating a minefield, with Caroline occasionally letting slip a comment about Amara's education or my career choices. But there are also moments of genuine connection. Elijah's father teaching our daughter chess with the same patience he once showed Elijah. Olivia becoming one of my closest confidants. We've created a fragile peace built on mutual respect, if not perfect understanding. The greatest lesson I've learned is that resilience isn't about never breaking. It's about how you put yourself back together. Each time the Montgomerys tried to break us, we rebuilt ourselves stronger, more certain of what we were fighting for. That certainty becomes a kind of armor that no amount of money or power can penetrate. Our love story isn't special because Elijah is a billionaire and I'm not. It's special because we refused to let anyone else define what was possible for us. We chose each other, day after day, when every force around us said we shouldn't. And in that choice is a kind of power that transcends wealth, status, or privilege. If you've ever felt like an outsider fighting for love against all odds, I want you to know you're not alone. Share your story in the comments below. Your journey matters, your resistance matters, and if you're in the middle of that fight right now, remember, your love doesn't need anyone's approval but your own. It's not always easy, nothing worth having ever is, but on the other side of that struggle is a life that truly belongs to you. Subscribe for more real stories about defying expectations and finding happiness on your own terms. Because the most powerful stories aren't fairy tales. They're the messy, beautiful reality of choosing love over fear, authenticity over acceptance, and courage over comfort, every single time.